Story 1. When my spouse and I bought our dream home, we specifically chose it for the lake access. The property came with a deeded walkway easement, basically a legal right to use a 10-foot wide path down to the lake. This easement was clearly listed on both our deed and purchasing agreement. We spent the first 2 years enjoying our little slice of paradise, often taking evening walks down to the water. Everything changed when our next-door neighbors moved in. From day one, they acted like they owned the entire lakefront, despite having their own separate lake access. At first, it was just dirty looks when we'd use our stairs to the lake. Then came the passive-aggressive comments. They confronted me one day, complaining about how they'd paid a premium for lakefront property and hadn't expected people walking through what they considered their yard. When I explained about our deeded easement being on both our property's documents, they ominously replied that we'd see about that. I didn't think much of it at the time. But one day, while we were out of town, they took matters into their own hands. We came home to find our stairs completely demolished and a 6-foot wall constructed across our easement. I was in shock. When I confronted them about destroying our stairs, they smugly told me this was their property and they didn't want us walking through it anymore. I reminded them about the legally binding easement on their purchasing agreement and land survey. Their response was simply to dare us to sue them. So I did. I really didn't want to, but they left me no choice. What followed was the most frustrating legal battle I could imagine. Every time we'd make progress, they'd throw up another roadblock. They wouldn't respond to court summons, then asked for extensions at the last minute. When things weren't going their way, they'd suddenly switch attorneys. After 3.5 years of this nonsense, we finally got our day in court. The judge took one look at the documentation and granted a summary judgment. It was clear as day we had the legal right to access our easement. But did they accept defeat? Of course not. They insisted it wasn't over, claiming the judge had made a mistake. They filed a motion claiming judicial error. The judge reviewed it and basically said, "Nope, I was right the first time." They were ordered to rebuild our stairs and tear down their wall. Now they've filed an appeal, another appeal. At this point, they've probably spent over $100,000 in legal fees, all to try to block our measly 10-foot wide walkway. They have their own lake access. They're just doing this out of spite. Yesterday, I ran into them while getting my mail. I suggested we could end this now if they just rebuild the stairs and remove the wall as ordered by the court. They responded by threatening to spend every penny they had before letting us win. When I explained this wasn't about winning, but accessing what we legally owned, they threatened to make sure it cost us every penny we had too. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording all our interactions since this started. My attorney suggested it after their first threat. Last week, we filed a motion for legal fees based on their documented pattern of frivolous litigation and harassment. The judge reviewed the recordings, their history of delays, and their multiple baseless appeals. This morning, we got the ruling. Not only do they have to rebuild our stairs and remove their wall within 30 days, but they also have to pay all our legal fees. The judge specifically cited their pattern of vexatious litigation and apparent intent to cause financial harm through abuse of the legal system. The look on their faces when they got the news was priceless. They're still threatening to appeal again, but now each new appeal will just add to the legal fees they have to pay us. Their own attorney finally dropped them, telling them further appeals would be pointless. I'm still baffled by the whole thing. They could have spent all that money on literally anything else, upgrading their own lake access, traveling, literally anything. Instead, they chose to waste it trying to bully us. At least justice finally prevailed. Story 2. I work at a large retail chain, where the stockroom feels more like the Wild West. Chaos is the norm. Recently, we got a new supervisor, Sarah, who seems to think she's leading an elite military unit. Her obsession with speed is relentless. She constantly pushes us to work faster, no matter if it compromises quality. As long as the job is done quickly, she's satisfied. One day, during peak restock time, the stockroom was a whirlwind of boxes and activity. Sarah stormed in with her clipboard and her I'm in charge demeanor. She singled me out while I was halfway through a massive inventory check. You're taking way too long with these, she said sharply. Just get through them quickly. We don't have time to check every single item. I tried to explain that rushing inventory checks is a bad idea, but she cut me off with a condescending smile. If you can't speed this up, maybe this job isn't the right fit for you, she said smugly, as if she had just delivered a profound revelation. All right, Sarah, you want speed? Let's see how quickly things can spiral out of control. The following day, I was scheduled for another inventory check. Instead of my usual careful process counting each item thoroughly, I decided to play by Sarah's rules. I glanced at the shelves and jotted down numbers that seemed close enough. I didn't bother opening boxes to verify that the contents matched the labels. What usually took me 2 hours, I finished in a mere 20 minutes. Sarah noticed my newfound efficiency and looked elated. She walked over, grinning. See, that wasn't so hard, was it? Keep this up, and you might even earn a bonus this month, she said, practically glowing with self-congratulation. Fast forward a week. Our store manager, Mike, called an emergency meeting. The inventory reports had come in, and they were catastrophic. According to the data, we were missing thousands of dollars worth of merchandise. It appeared as though half our stock had vanished, or we were operating an underground black market. Mike was furious. Customers were complaining about out-of-stock items, and the regional manager was breathing down his neck. Mike turned to Sarah for answers. How did this happen? He asked, his frustration evident. Without missing a beat, Sarah tried to shift the blame. It must have been the team, she said. They weren't thorough enough with the counts. That was my moment. I raised my hand and calmly said, Actually, I followed Sarah's instructions exactly. She told us to skip checking the items and focus on finishing quickly. So that's what I did. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. Mike slowly turned to Sarah, his expression shifting from confusion to barely contained anger. Is this true? He asked, his voice cold and sharp. Sarah stumbled over her words. Well, I didn't mean to skip everything entirely. I just meant to, speed it up. But the damage was done. Mike's face was a mask of fury. So you decided to cut corners on one of the most critical tasks for our store's operations. Do you realize we now have to redo the entire inventory check because of this mess? And that's exactly what happened. The next day, Sarah and a few unlucky team members spent 12 grueling hours redoing the entire inventory process from scratch. The rest of us got to focus on our usual duties, occasionally glancing over to watch their frustration unfold. It was oddly satisfying. As they toiled, I made it a point to walk by occasionally and ask, Need help speeding things up? I could skip a few checks for you if that helps. Sarah's face every time was a mix of rage and humiliation, but she couldn't say a word. After all, I was just following her earlier directives. By the end of the recount, the discrepancies were staggering. Thousands of dollars in errors were uncovered. Who could have guessed that rushing through inventory checks would lead to mistakes? Sarah received a formal warning from the regional manager. After that, her demands for speed stopped. She even started being noticeably polite to me whenever we crossed paths. The icing on the cake. A couple of weeks later, I received a bonus for outstanding attention to detail in helping resolve the inventory disaster. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Sarah, who couldn't meet my eyes when I got the bonus slip. Now, whenever Sarah walks by, I flash her a friendly smile and say, Don't worry, boss, I'm working just as fast as you like. Story 3. This happened in the summer of 1974, when I was 4 years old. When I was a kid, we had a next-door neighbor who was a total witch. She was a 40-something woman who liked high heels, mules, big jewelry, lots of makeup, and wore long, flowy kaftans in garish colors that did not flatter her. She had a big perm, remember? It's the 70s, and was notorious in our neighborhood for being an entitled twat. Her favorite thing was to go on to neighbors' landings, either early in the morning or late at night, and steal decorations and potted plants, which she would then put in her back garden. She once even dug up someone's small tree out of their front yard because, according to the neighbor, she felt it would look better in her garden. Total witch. For the most part, she left my family alone. My family has a take-no-crap reputation in the neighborhood, and she knew it only glared at me and my siblings when we played outside. She hated kids. Sadly, that didn't last. One day, one of my sisters got badly sliced by a long nail when she went to pick flowers off the passion flower vine on the fence. Important later. Turned out the witch had hammered dozens of long nails into our fence so she could hang potted plants she'd most likely stolen. The leaves on the vine had hidden them. Until my sister got sliced, she had to get a tetanus shot, which made her sick all day. Mom was pissed, so she went out and actually spent the rest of the day hammering each and every nail back out through the fence and back into the witch's garden, causing many of the pots to fall and break. This is probably why she did what she did. About a month later, my mom goes into our kitchen and sees a man in our yard. She went out and asked, "What the heck are you doing?" Guy tells her he was a gardener and had been hired to get rid of the vine on the fence. Mom asked him who had hired him to do this. The owner of the fence, he told her, and gestured to the witch's house. Mom told him, calmly, since none of this was his fault, that it wasn't her fence, and that she was the owner, not the other witch. The poor guy was horrified. However, the damage was done. He'd already cut into the hardwood and roots, and now our vine was dead. After the poor guy left, the witch stiffed him. We found out later. Mom went to the witch's house and confronted her. That witch didn't even deny it, just laughed in my mom's face and said, "I did it, so what? It's not like you can do anything about it." Then sauntered back into her house. She just messed with the wrong family. 2 days later, the witch went on a 2-week vacation with her husband, also in a hole like her, to Cabo. Revenge time. The day she left, my older siblings, along with a family friend, decided the witch's back garden needed improvements. So they climbed the fence, went into her garden, dug up all the pretty flowers and small trees, carted them out, along with the stolen decorations, and replaced them with high-pollen weeds, quick-growing ivy and lots of poison oak and poison ivy that they'd, carefully, dug up from a nearby state park. I was too young to help, sadly. We then temporarily moved our 3 dogs into our backyard. Neighbor was afraid of them despite the fact they were 2 Pomeranians and a small mutt. We also had a 9-foot fence, which was too high for her or her husband's huge self to climb. So we knew our garden would be safe from her. My family excitedly waited. When the witch got back and saw her new and improved garden, she threw the biggest, most epic tantrum and meltdown we'd ever seen. It was spectacular, a whole class of sugared-up, pissed-off preschoolers couldn't have thrown a bigger tantrum. From the top of the fence, we all watched. Dad took the day off to see the freak out, as he put it, as the witch screamed and ranted, pulled her hair, kicked the weeds, and threw anything she could get her hands on, all the while cussing and screeching like she was getting a chili powder enema. Then she spotted all of us watching her. She yelled and cursed at all us, laughing, kids, coming to the correct conclusion we had done this to her precious garden. By this time all the surrounding neighbors were also watching, but she of course zeroed in on us. The witch then stormed over to our house and banged on our door until Mom opened the door. Dad let her deal with it, as he was still laughing so hard. The witch then demanded my family to not only pull all those ugly plants out, and to, of course, pay for new ones and plant them, and to do it now, right now. Our mom just looked at her, yawned, told her she had zero proof it was her kids who'd done it. Mom knew. Even sat and watched with me as my siblings did it, laughing the whole time. I think at one point my dad even helped. Mom then reminded her she had stolen dozens of plants from the neighbors, had been caught blatantly stealing from their front gardens, yet was surprised that someone had retaliated. Mom laughed, told her to get lost, and went back inside. She ranted at us through the door for about an hour, until her voice, blessedly, gave out, then stomped back to her house. She avoided us from then on, and would give a death glare to my mom whenever she saw her. Mom would just smile, give her the finger, and go about her business. She was intimidated by my dad and wouldn't do anything when he was around. But Dad worked a lot, so wasn't there most of the time. We donated most of the dug-up plants to neighbors she'd stolen from, and returned the stolen ornaments and decorations to their rightful owners, if we found them, but kept 2 rose bushes which we planted by our back gate, a ceramic hearth cat, which I still have, and a glass and metal sun god decoration nobody claimed. The witch never did get rid of all the weeds and didn't realize it was poison oak she was pulling bare-handed, until she and her husband got horrible rashes over 1/3 of their bodies, and I was told in some very unfortunate places. Edit. Some people have been asking why my mom didn't use the witch's words. I did it. So what? It's not like you can do anything about it. Then slammed the door in her face. She thought about saying that, but she was smart enough to never admit to any alleged wrongdoing. Not that anyone else in the neighborhood thought getting their stolen stuff back from the neighborhood jerk was wrong, and B, by not admitting to anything made the witch much more subdued and paranoid, on the off chance it actually wasn't us, and made her more leery of all her neighbors. Made life in the neighborhood better in the long term, since from then on, no plants or decorations were ever stolen again. Story 4. Hello everyone. I promised if I ever came across another entitled Karen, I would post, and I hope this is the right subreddit. So I just started my shift, and I was feeling good. I had a good dinner, all my good partners were on shift, and I was jamming out to my favorite Backstreet Boys track in my car. Then it happens. Dispatch sends out a call about a disturbance at a local coffee shop in my area. So I take the call and zoom in over. I pull up, and there she is, Karen. I take one step out of my patrol car, and she basically runs up to me. Now Karen was 42 years old with that really short haircut, and I did notice that she had a big red mark on her cheek. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" I asked her. In the most dramatic tone, she said, "Thank goodness you're here. I was just attacked by a crazy woman in the coffee shop." "Okay, where is she?" Karen points to a woman in the shop. I tell her to wait outside. She doesn't, and I request an additional deputy to come out. I walk inside and see a young woman who is very angry and very pregnant. I would have to say like 7 months maybe. She is sitting at a table on her phone. I approached her and asked her what happened. So I am in here getting a coffee, just minding my business, when that lady points at Karen, walks up to me, and starts touching my belly. I ask her to stop, but she keeps touching me. Then when the barista sets my coffee down for me, she takes it off the counter, hands it back to the barista, and says it's illegal to sell coffee to a pregnant woman. Then she starts touching my belly again, saying that I am a bad mom. I ask her to leave me alone and stop touching me. She then tells me she is a mother, and that it's okay. She got really rough touching my belly, and I got scared. When I tried to walk away, she wouldn't stop, so I slapped her to get her to leave me alone. I looked at Karen, who was standing by the door rolling her eyes as the pregnant woman was telling her story. My partner shows up and walks up to me. Now my partner is a no bullcrap taker, short, southern, corn-feed, mud-raised woman. I asked her to hold it down out here. I talked to the manager and several employees behind the bar. They all confirmed what the pregnant woman said, and the manager even brought me back to the office and showed me the security footage. All of it confirms the pregnant woman's story, and on the camera it looked like Karen was getting aggressive with the pregnant woman because the lady tried to walk away, but Karen wouldn't let her stomach go. I walk out to the pregnant mom. "Ma'am, you want to press charges?" I asked the pregnant lady. "Yes, please." I walk over to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." "What?" "You're under arrest." Side note, in my state, you can be arrested for intentional and unlawful touching of someone. Since Karen was both aggressive and kept touching this pregnant lady, she broke the law. She then started screaming, "You can't arrest me. It is not illegal to touch a pregnant woman. You should arrest the employees of this place. They were giving coffee to pregnant women, endangering the child." "Ma'am, No, you cannot touch someone without their permission, pregnant or not. Second, there is no law that says a pregnant woman cannot drink coffee. So please turn around and place your hands behind your back. No, I am not getting arrested, I am leaving. I have to get home to my children. Karen turns to leave the store, and my partner steps in front of her with a "try me" look on her face. Karen stops dead in her tracks. I took that moment, snatched her hands, and put on a pair of cuffs. Karen loses it. She starts trying to get away and screams. She is flailing so hard that she knocks off my body camera. I have to pick her up and carry her to my patrol car. When I get there, my partner opens the door, but Karen actually puts her feet on panel to stop me from putting her in. My partner rolls her eyes, grabs her taser, and zaps her leg. Karen shrieks and finally gets in the car. My partner, the saint that she is, says she will do the paperwork while I take Karen to jail. So the whole ride I am getting told how I need to watch my back, how she knows the sheriff, how I am going to lose my job, and how I have no idea who she is. I get her to jail, and she starts going off about her rights. She needs to talk to a lawyer, and she needs to be released right now. The jail staff was looking at me with that "what nightmare did you bring us" stare. So I did my report and realized I still have 9 hours on shift. Luckily, the rest of the night was not that bad. Story 5. I once knew a young lad named Trevor, a young man who I regret not knowing better. Trevor, which is very much not his real name, was a more realistic version of what would happen to a good Will Hunting type personality if he was raised in the rural Midwest. For those who don't know, the culture of Midwestern USA is not defined by football, wheat fields, or people chanting USA. It's defined by boredom, and all the crazy crap people do with that boredom. See, the thing about Trevor was that he is insanely smart, though very much on the spectrum, and loved to develop skills that were honestly useless in 90% of the real world. Let's be real, as much as they make for an awesome YouTube videos or TikToks. Outside of burglars and secret agents, the ability to pick a lock in 6 seconds flat, parker up walls, or know how to determine a security camera's eye line are not really skills that have much value in most 9-5 settings. But Trevor had those skills. He had learned them from the early days of YouTube, from a 4chan still owned by Moot, from Something Awful, and God knows what other sites existed at the time that a person like myself have never heard of. He was also a Midwesterner, which meant he had the time, space, and boredom needed to get good at them. Now, the thing about Trevor is that he went to a school that seemed to still be stuck between the satanic panic of the late 80s and the drug wars of the 90s. They didn't just have all those silly rules on the books, such as no gangs of 5 or more can congregate, they actually enforced them. This led to poor Trevor, an avid hoodie fan, and odd loner who never could quite get a handle on social things, to be an easy target for the administration. Trevor, being a child of the internet, really did try to do things the right way when it came to defying the absurd or unrealistic demands from the administration. When there was an unfair rule regarding shorts, he tried to wear a kilt, but not having the charisma needed to rally other students, he just made a target of himself, and the school just added another draconian rule to the books. Now, I'll never know where Trevor got his idea for revenge on the school, though I would not be shocked if it was from a very particular episode of Malcolm in the Middle, but apparently after enough failed attempts to stand up to the administration, only to end up with just another draconian rule on the book, something clicked for Trevor. See, as mentioned, this administration was stuck in the past. Somehow, back in the day, a bunch of rural idiots got it in their heads that all their pasty white preteens were all just one NWA album away from becoming hardened gangbangers, one Anne Rice novel out from sacrificing their school chums to the devil, one puff of weed away from becoming crack addicts, etc. So, Trevor, with no heroes to turn to, decided to become the villain, and thus began Trevor's long campaign to make the school as unbearable for everyone else as it was for him. He began small, little things scattered around the school. Rolled paper with odd-smelling contents scattered behind the gym. A bit of graffiti of some ominous-looking symbol on the corner of a utility shed, etc. He mostly also did these things at night, which, if anyone has ever lived out in the boonies knows, nighttime can get darker than if someone just blindfolded you. His main reason for this was to avoid getting caught with any of his little props during the day, now that the school had suddenly implemented a bag search policy. With each little prop he left behind, so did the administration tighten their grip around the student body. Graffiti. I really use the term lightly. It was mostly just swears, written on walls and bathrooms in marker and pencils. Sorry, no more outside writing implements. You had to take an assigned no. 2 pencil from the newly implemented communal class supplies and return it at the end of class. No use of gym lockers or showers without a teacher present, which, for various reasons, led to a large number of sweaty teens as most teachers, understandable, weren't volunteering their time to chaperone underage children showering, and the gym teacher could not exist in multiple points in space at the same time. Computer room laptops screensavers turned to inappropriate anime topics. That one was a twofer, getting both an entirely unmanageable permission system put in place, limiting computer access outside of class, as well as a general ban on anime, which naturally was very inconsistently enforced. Red-colored shoes with a black star in Sharpie on them. Red accessories are now banned, such as bandanas, shoes, scarves, etc. I think Trevor was more going for a Red Scare angle on this one, but turned into a gangland thing instead. This went on for quite some time, and so people's resentment built slowly, but surely. I'd like to say that the stick that broke the camel's back was one of the many new dress code restrictions that were unfairly put against the girls, which if the administration had gone on would probably end up looking like nuns. But this is the Midwest after all. The real camel break was the banning of school phones from property. See, they were already banned from classrooms, but most people put them in their locker. What pushed the administration to ban them outright was the discovery of discarded burner phones. In reality, Trevor had managed to get his hands on a bunch of very obsolete flip phones, none of them the same year or even brand, but all the right type of shabby to look like something from a cartel movie. He programmed some ominously vague-looking contacts into the phones, specifically one of them being the meat packer, and all of them leading to dead numbers. He then made sure to throw them away in optimally incriminating-looking spots. If anything, the fact that all the phones were incapable of making outgoing calls anymore almost seemed to add to the paranoia factor. On its own, maybe even this rule would have been tolerated. This was the place where good old-fashioned values still rang true, and where people believed that kids should be spending less time with their nose in a screen and more time experiencing the grand virtues of the real world. You know, all those empty fields, an economically downturned Main Street, which was really just a strip mall, and abandoned garbage dumps. The thing is, the school had a very strict trespassing policy, one that actually predated Trevor's little campaign. There were exemptions, but not every student was on the swim team, so most kids had to kindly get themselves off of property in an orderly manner. Here's the thing though, this was not the 80s, this was not the 90s. Parents had no interest in having to come on time to pick up their kids every day. They liked being able to text at the last minute and tell their kids to walk down the road and take the bus, or go home with a friend. This was one of those weirdly sprawling rural culture, so school buses wouldn't and couldn't cover every house. Yes, I know they're legally obligated, but let's not kid ourselves. Small towns are their own sort of crazy, and the idea that every parent in the student body had to now be punctual just wasn't all that feasible. Some families had both parents still working. A lot of parents were also salaried, and could be asked, or strong-armed, into staying later. Hell, some parents just worked because they didn't want to go home. This started a chain of events that led to people asking the question, how come things have gotten so bad under this administration? See, the irony of all these draconian rules is that it made it seem like the school was in the midst of an epidemic. This school had been fine for years, but clearly something had changed, and the current administration couldn't handle it. It wasn't an overnight process by any means, but within a decent stretch of time, most of the higher-ups in the administration were systematically replaced. Then, wouldn't you just know it, all these big problems they were having seemed to suddenly clear up. No more graffiti, still plenty of pot smoking. No more gang paraphernalia, and no more for a lot more. The new administration was much more reasonable. That is to say, they stopped reporting and enforcing issues that might make them look bad, and instead looked the other way whenever they could. Even anime eventually made a comeback. Thus life went back to normal. As for Trevor, I'd like to say his story ended with him becoming a captain of industry, or paraded on people's shoulders through town square. Story 6. Now I want to start this off. I want to say first and foremost I try to be a good man, not a nice one. Now some of you may have read my other revenge, from when I was an exterminator. Now, before that, I worked in a maximum security prison. This one is a little long, but the details are important. Now, just a little background on me. I had an odd childhood, not a bad one, just one that most people don't live through. Both of my parents worked at night. My mother worked in a local bar, and my father was a martial arts instructor. Instead of using babysitters or a nanny, I had the choice of going to work with either my mom or my dad. What self-respecting little boy doesn't decide to go to the martial arts class instead of sitting at a bar? So, 5 days a week, 5 hours a day, I practiced. Even though I am pretty capable of handling myself, I am not what one would call intimidating. I'm not tall, I'm not super built. I looked like cannon fodder for inmates, to be perfectly honest, but I have never been one to take a job and not do my duties. It's not how I was raised. I was pretty good at getting contraband out of the prison and handling most situations, just kind of had a knack for it. Well, anytime you are good at getting rid of things bad people aren't supposed to have, you are going to make the occasional enemy. It happened to me more than a couple of times. Usually, it was just some harassment, verbal abuse, and an occasional punch thrown. It was to be expected. After all, these are mostly violent offenders. One guy took it a little too far. We had an elderly man everyone called Tootsie. He wasn't quite right in the head, partially due to the early stages of dementia, partially due to his age. He was cordial, often downright friendly with the staff, so we tried to keep a little extra eye out for him, making sure the younger, stronger inmates didn't take advantage of him. He wasn't the type you tended to think of as a security risk. At least I didn't. That was until the day I felt several sharp pokes in the ribs, pretty forceful, but not enough to do any real damage. I turned to see Tootsie standing there, toothbrush in hand. He had just tried to stab me in the ribs, repeatedly. Notice I said tried. Back when Tootsie had been put in prison, a little time and a state-issued toothbrush would make a heck of a weapon. The prison had long since fixed that by switching to a brand of rubber toothbrush. It was pointless to try to sharpen them. I grabbed the toothbrush out of his hand and asked him why he tried to stab me. I think I was in shock more than anything. Without missing a beat, Tootsie smiled, pointed to another young man, and said with a smile, "He paid me too." I believed him. I had taken a lot of contraband off the little punk, and he always gave me a hard time about it. I was faced with a decision. I could turn Tootsie in, he would get thrown in the hole and face additional charges, and the punk would get away with it because Tootsie's testimony would hold the same weight as a feather. Or I could let it slide for now and handle it after lockdown. I told you, I'm not physically intimidating, and no one had ever had the chance to see me fight. I chose the second option. I waited until lockdown and started searching the common areas. It was a very common place for inmates that didn't want to risk getting caught with a weapon on them to stash things before they got locked in their rooms for the night. It didn't take long to find a decent little homemade weapon. I headed over to the room our little punk was in and opened his cell. I made a little show of putting on my leather search gloves and wiping my prints off the knife before announcing a cell search. I dropped the knife on the floor of the room and stepped on it before saying, "Well, would you look at that, a weapon right out in the open." He reacted pretty much exactly as I expected. He shouted about a setup and charged. Perfect. A sloppy, untrained right hand was flying at my face. Easy to block, easy to trap, and just as easy to break if you know what you are doing. 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, for 10 years, I knew what I was doing. There was a wet pop, and I let him finish dropping to the floor. I kicked the knife out of the room, called for backup and medical. There was a weapon involved, and an officer's word against an inmate. My report was the only thing that mattered. Tootsie didn't get charged. Young Punk got a charge for attempting to assault an officer with a deadly weapon and a badly broken arm, and I got a reputation among the inmates as the one you didn't want to mess with. Edit. If you just feel awful for the murderer that tried to have me killed, go stuff yourself. He wasn't a victim. He was human trash that had already taken a life and was trying to take another. Cry for him to yourself, because I don't care about your sympathy for him.